black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know. I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun, grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage, all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Zio!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I'm back. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. I'm back from the International Bigfoot Conference. Had a blast. I mean, Russell, I want to give a shout out to Russell Accord really quick. He does such a great job at putting on a very smooth, very cool conference. And I see the stress behind the scenes, but you'd never know it going to the conference. I mean, everything runs smoothly. Vendors are happy. Speakers are happy. I mean, it was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. And I sure hope he does it next year. So Russell Accord, thank you for inviting me. You were gracious enough to invite me. And you know, you're beyond kind to everyone. You know, I see how you treat the speakers, how you treat Bob, you're just so kind to everyone. Thank you so much, Russell. I can't say enough about the conference. I want to give a shout out to Miriam. I hope you made it home safe. Miriam's mother, it was nice talking to you on the phone. She flew out all the way from Connecticut. Had a great time. Bethany, another one, larger than life. Bethany, it was great meeting you. Thank you so much for coming out to the conference. And I want to shout out my boys in the UK, James and Tom. James came down and we talked for a long time and had a great time. Guys, thanks so much. And I wish I could shout out everyone. The fans are too good to me. You guys are too kind, too sweet. And I really appreciated meeting everyone I met. And it was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. My favorite part of the conference, they showed this video of, it's Bob Gimlin. And I remember when Bob and Russ were, let me pull up the name of it real quick. Bob Gimlin, The Legend of Bigfoot. And so Russell and I knew about this way before it was actually put out. And they were telling me about the concept of Bob narrating what happened up there on the mountain when they got the film. And there's a lot of cool things in the film I don't think most people know. But it was, and I remember when they first told me about it, I was like, I don't know, guys, an animated film. I don't know. My heart sank a little bit. And I was like, I don't know how this turned out, guys. You know, I'll support you either way, but I really hope it's not hokey. And I didn't think it would be because Russell's very, he wants to make sure, you know, Bob is classy and everything he's involved in is classy. So he does watch after Bob. But I got to tell you, it was awesome. The film was freaking awesome. It was so cool to see. And the animation was cool because it put you right in the moment. And Bob's telling the story and he's narrating what's happening. And there's just so much to what actually happened, you know. And Bob's told me about when they were leaving, they got stuck in the mud and there was mudslides. And he didn't really, when you watch the film, you're like, you guys are lucky to be alive. You're lucky you didn't get washed down that mountain. I had a great time. And I hope Netflix or someone picks it up because I think the audience, the people out there, the fans of Bob would love to see this film. I mean, it was awesome. So I had a great time. I want to thank all the fans again. I wish I could shout out everyone. I really do appreciate you guys. You guys are Sasquatch Chronicles. The fans really are Sasquatch Chronicles. And it was so cool to see the shirts and People love the show. It meant a lot to me. It really, really meant a lot to me. I want to thank you guys. But tonight I got Travis Walton. I'll play my interview for you guys here in a moment. But Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie. I want to say it came out in the late 80s, early 90s, of when he was actually abducted by aliens. And it's a fascinating account. I realize it's a Bigfoot show, but it was Travis Walton. I was like, I got to get this guy. I got to hear this. You know, I've been a fan of that encounter for so long, and it's always fascinated me, So I hope you guys enjoy my interview with him tonight. And if you haven't seen the Fire in the Sky movie, go watch it. And then I'll also be talking to Adam Davis. Adam is, I love Adam. It's been a while since he's been on the show. He'll be sharing his, the things he's been doing recently. Some expeditions. We'll talk about the Ring Pendek. We'll talk about the Almas and Neanderthals. And Adam's just a great guy to talk to. So I hope you guys really enjoy the show tonight. Let's jump into it. Here's my interview with Travis Walton. Take a listen. Travis, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I know it's late. It's for the audience listening, it's after 10 o'clock, but it's been a long day. So,
yeah, well, thanks for having me. And, it's kind of unusual for me to, attend a Bigfoot conference, but it's there's actually things in common with the UFO community. Yeah. It's a group of people who are frequently confronted the resistance of the general public to something that they, in their personal lives, know to be true.
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of correlations, and I've talked to a lot of people who've actually either encountered them, aliens I'm talking about, either encountered them or abductions. And my heart goes out to them because it's one of those situations to where you don't know what the right thing to say is. You don't really know what the right thing to... Because it's hard to relate. Unless it's happened to you, it's very, very hard to relate. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, no one can say, hey, Travis, I know how you felt. Well, unless you were hit by a light coming out of a craft and taken away for 5 days, no, you don't know. You have no clue what it's like.
Well, I think, in spite of the fact that the Paramount movie, had some fictional departures from what really happened, I think it does leave people with the kind of emotional impact that we actually experienced.
Yeah.
And, in that sense, a movie is a kind of a vicarious sharing of experience that people can, better relate to what happened. And I noticed that in the aftermath of the showing of the movie going public, that people did seem to identify more with what we'd been through.
Yeah. And I want to ask you, before we get into the encounter, and you're gracious enough to share the encounter, and I'm well aware you've shared it a million times, and you're probably sick of talking about it. But up on the Mogollon Rim, when you guys were doing lumber, and you guys were tearing down trees, and you guys were up there, did you ever experience anything beyond just aliens? I mean, was there any Bigfoot-type vocals, or did you ever experience anything odd up there?
Well, I've certainly heard reports from other people who have shared their experiences. There was a young man on another crew who was pretty traumatized by what he described as definitely an encounter with a large, hairy creature.
Yeah.
I personally haven't seen such a thing, but I've heard many stories over the years. And, I heard about what's called the Mogollon Monster for years before anybody even coined the term Bigfoot, for these large, hairy beings.
Yeah. And you still hear about that today, the Mogollon Monster up on the Mogollon Rim. I mean, there's still encounters to this day of people running into it. But would you take us back, Travis, to that night when you guys were leaving the area? And what I find and I don't want to take too much of the story out, but you guys are leaving an area and the light's so bright you guys think it's a fire. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it wasn't especially bright. It was just a glow that was out of place in the woods. Normally you just wouldn't see any kind of light One of the first thoughts was maybe some deer hunters, It was deer hunting season. We'd heard shots in the distance that day, and that was the first thought. But the light was coming from higher up than any sort of a, tent or campfire would have been. So it was well above ground level. And it recalled to mind for us, our encountering a tree that had been hit by lightning the night before and was on fire up high. And we got out and put the fire out, of course, but that's where the name of the movie Fire in the Sky came from, is that, we were wondering if this was a similar fire that had started. But that was just an initial impression. We were just nothing that we could come up with that it might be. Could it be the sun going down? But that was quite a bit earlier. Could it be the moon? No, we can see that in a different direction. Any sort of a thing. It wasn't all alarming or anything at first. It was just kind of like idle curiosity at first. But the longer it went, the more it wasn't fitting in with things, and then the more focused the attention of the whole crew became on what the heck could that glow be.
Was it like a red color? Can you describe the color?
No. The Paramount movie made it look like molten lava. It was described by some of the crew as looking like molten metal, but it was more the color of like white hot, like molten steel being poured liquid, when it's so hot that there's barely any yellow to it anymore. It's giving off almost a white light, but it never looked like it was depicted in the movie, which looked more like a pool of red molten lava, and that wasn't accurate.
When you saw the lights, was it coming from a certain part of the craft, or... Well, go ahead and just tell us what happened, and then I don't want to... I feel like I'm cutting ahead.
Just idle curiosity. I wonder what that could be. And then I said, Mike, hurry up and get up there where we can see what it is, because I could see that the light was coming through a break in the trees, and it was sort of washing across the road ahead. So I knew that, at that point we'd have a clear view of the source of the light. So closer we got to that, the more, intense the crew's attention became. And when we got to that point, I call it burst into the clearing in a way that, we could suddenly see it, and there was just no mistaking what we were looking at. One of the guys in the back, I think it was Alan Dallas, yelled out, "It's a flying saucer," or "It's a spaceship," something like that. As if anybody needed to say what it was. That was less than 100 feet away, a glowing metallic disc, and not, unmistakable. And the skeptic suggestion that what we actually saw was the planet Jupiter is just laughably absurd. There's just no way. This was not a tiny point of light off in the distance. This was a clearly defined object.
Yeah, that argument might hold up to like an 8-year-old, but not to a grown man, especially when you see that. But what compelled you? So you guys pull up, you guys see this thing, and most people have seen the movie, but you guys see this thing, and it's hovering. What compelled you to get out of the truck? Was it just curiosity, or...
I'd say curiosity had a whole heck of a lot to do with it, and an assumption that this thing was going to take off and be gone in a very short period of time. Very often the crew is driving down the road and will catch sight of some animal and, try to say, "Hey, look over there, it's a bobcat," or whatever. And by the time their attention is, directed in that direction, it's already gone. So it was my thinking when I got out of that truck heading towards it that this thing would be gone before I had gone very far. A couple of the other guys have insisted that to them it looked like I was in some kind of a trance, But, turning around looking back at the crew, I'd say everybody looked entranced, you know what I mean? We were, in complete awe of what we were seeing. It was astonishing, and the look on our face, everybody's face probably would have been one of total astonishment. So,
I bet looking back, you wish Dallas would have gotten out. He's the bad guy in the movie for everyone. And I asked Travis about Dallas, but I'm not trying to I don't want to bash Dallas, but I remember thinking, I wish he would have gotten out instead of, why'd Travis have to get out? Why couldn't that guy get out? Because, the way the movie played it off, you're like, I want to see that guy hit with a beam of light.
Well, I definitely had my confrontations with him. He could be somebody to contend with at times, and that was the case with him.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So you get out, you're looking at this thing, and at what point it hit you with the light? Everyone's seen it in the movie. It hit you with the light. Can you describe the sound of the craft sitting there and describe what it felt like hitting you with that light? Because of the way it's very violent in the movie. When it hits you, it throws the actor through the air. And
No, actually, I'd say it was more violent, isn't that strange, than the movie portrayed it. I think the problem was they were afraid somebody might be looking down at their popcorn and missed that the point in the movie. And so they tried to drag it out. They made it look like the light came on and held the actor there and kind of just, held him for a little bit before it tossed him back. But it was more, from what everybody describes it as, just a blast of energy that just threw me through the air so violently that they immediately concluded that it had killed me. He's dead. They said that they were yelling at each other. He's dead. It killed him. And there was no mistaking that. John's description of my body landing like a sack of meat, like there wasn't a bone in my body, spoke to the fact that, the violence of it was so powerful, to literally throw you through the air 15 or 20 feet is, I find no fault with those guys taking off at that point. They did what anybody with any smarts would do, is get the heck away from the danger. There's no point in getting somebody else killed to save a dead man.
Yeah, I understand that, I guess, to a point. And I think you're very forgiving saying that, because I think deep down I would still hold some resentment that the guys left me there. But I think you're a very big man saying that. What did it feel like to be hit with that light? Can you describe, for someone who's never seen the movie, doesn't know what we're talking about, this light comes out of this craft, hits you, throws you through the air. For the audience, can you describe what that felt like?
Well, anybody who's worked on machinery or worked around various things might have felt what it's like to get shocked with some electricity. Touch a wire, some frayed insulation or something. It had an electric shock sort of a feeling if you've ever touched a spark plug wire or something like that. But at the same time, quite a bit like a physical blow. If you've ever been run into violently, didn't see it coming, the sudden stunning shock of that, all rolled into one. But, very quickly, losing consciousness.
Can I ask you there's two questions I want to ask you. One is, did the craft make a sound?
Yeah, it did, and the closer I got to it, the more I became aware of the sound it was making. From our point in the truck, hearing that, the higher pitches were more, a dominant part of the sound, but it was a very complex sound, a mixture of high tones and low tones that actually seemed to go off the range of human hearing, both on the high end and the low end. And very hard to describe. I once gave a talk to a group of engineering students at a technical institute, and they were keenly interested in the type of sounds. I worked as hard as I could to describe it to them in a way that would be meaningful. I think what they were looking for is some clue as to what powered this thing in terms of lift and, propulsion and whatnot. But a real high-pitched sort of a sound that sort of seemed to change with the position of your head. A very deep, throbbing element to it that you felt in your body as much as heard in your ears. And some of the guys in the truck said you could feel it vibrating the truck with that frequency.
Yeah, I can imagine being in that group. I'd be terrified, especially seeing you thrown through the air. And my heart goes out to a lot of those guys, because you get the impression, and you knew them, Travis, so, I'm kind of talking out of my butt here, but you get the impression most of them were pretty good guys, and they really were concerned about you. They really were worried about you. They were, even though they thought you were dead. Can I ask you, before we talk about what happens next, why do you think they hit you with that beam of light?
Well, I'm not so certain anymore that they had hit me with in any sort of a deliberate firing of a weapon, although that's one possibility. I went through a whole range of possibilities of what this energy might be. And some people trying to explain it away actually come up with some pretty unusual concepts. The Mogollon Rim being a giant fault line there, it was speculated that there had been some kind of an earthquake, and that this was like what they call earthquake lights, where, the stories of it generates a kind of like a earth to sky sort of a lightning bolt generated by the, torsion in the rocks underneath the earth. Supposedly, trying to explain this away, of course, some of this energy came up out of the earth, came through my body, and caused me to hallucinate. And this was a pretty elaborate theory that Dr. Persinger came up with, but it just fails miserably in explaining how could 7 people have the same hallucination. Certainly, this supposed earthquake light couldn't have passed through them too. It just didn't make any sense. But that's one possibility. Another possibility that it actually was actual lightning, since that part of the Mogollon Rim there has the second highest frequency of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States. If that was lightning caused by this feature, perhaps it had actually struck the craft and then, as a secondary discharge, passed through me on its way to ground. There's a number of possibilities. The descriptions that were given by the lawmen interviewing these people and putting in their report was, one described it as looking like a foot-wide blue laser beam. Another describing it as looking like a long blue flame. Another described it as being like a lightning bolt. And so, this blast of energy, it was actually also compared to like stepping on a landmine or, something of that nature.
So you get hit with this light, the guys take off, and what's your next memory that you remember?
Well, it's not my favorite part of the description, but I woke up on board the craft. Didn't know where I was at first. Eventually, came to remember approaching the craft and then thinking that perhaps I'd somehow been injured and taken to a hospital, because I knew I was on some kind of raised surface. I felt this device across my chest. There was a light above me. The ceiling seemed closer than it ought to be, so it seemed like I was on some sort of raised surface, not laying on the floor, but in a very, half there, in and out sort of a barely conscious sort of a feeling. At the same time, feeling a lot of pain, a feeling of suffocation, a feeling of impending danger or something that generated a tremendous amount of fear in me. But, what could be wrong? What are the doctors up to? Thinking I'm in a hospital, thinking that these are doctors I'm hearing moving around me. But when my vision finally cleared and I could see these beings, I knew where I was, and it was an incredible burst of fear and adrenaline that went through my body that gave me enough strength to get off of the table. This device they had on top of me, it fell off, and I just grabbed for something to defend myself with, flailing at them, making threatening, striking sorts of movements. They, at that point, had begun to approach me, but hadn't really gotten close enough to where I could, within striking distance. I was just flailing away in a way to sort of try to scare them away from coming any closer, screaming the whole time, just basically out of my mind with fear, just totally hysterical, to the max, maximum fear, more fear than I've ever felt any time in my entire life. But it was the feeling of being mortally wounded, that something was terribly wrong inside, and then feeling trapped. But above all, the feeling of suffocation. Nothing adds to panic more than the feeling of suffocation. I've made the comparison to waterboarding, an interrogation technique that, everybody involved knows is not going to be fatal. They've even trained for it, but it still works because it generates a level of fear that's like nothing else. So, this over-the-top fear in this dimly lit environment, very cramped quarters, a real claustrophobic sort of feeling. But my driving thought at that moment was escape, of course. They left the room abruptly, hopefully, as a response to my combativeness. I went looking for a way out. I encountered another type of being that I at first took to be a human being. And in later, thoughts, I think that they were probably not actual humans, but some type of being close enough to, I think, probably just chosen because I took them to be human, and that I, became less combative. Of course, that if they were trying to in some way give me some sort of medical treatment and help me to recover from the effects of being hit with that energy, then it was important that I cooperate. And once I became combative with these small creatures, and my fear of them was not going to be overcome in any timely manner. So I think, whether these, people have offered various theories. These human-looking beings were actually some sort of an illusion, or some sort of mechanical or other sort of method just used to make me think that something that looked kind of human would help me out of there. But whatever it was, whatever these beings were, I don't think it's too far-fetched for there to be alien creatures quite similar to humans. I also don't think that it's too far-fetched for there to be various things that get lumped into the category of, quote, grays, that are actually very similar species that just,
Can I ask you a question? So the first entities you ran into were not human-looking. They were very much like what people describe as the small grays that you ran into.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
If you could have got your hands on one of them, do you think you would have killed one of them?
Well, I think, they were probably, even in my weakened condition like that, my advantage being so much larger than them was so clear cut, and probably would have done a lot of serious harm. And on top of that, I think that they probably were trying to gain some sort of telepathic control.
And I've heard you talk about that, and they couldn't. There's a couple questions I want to ask. One, the feeling of suffocation. Do you think that was because of your injuries, or do you think that was because of the ship you were on?
Well, I don't know. It could be either one. It could have been on account of the injuries. But I'm today in discussions with artists about recreating these scenes. It became more obvious to me that it was probably more likely to do with some sort of a quality in the atmosphere inside that craft, because I did notice a fairly clear-cut difference once I exited the craft.
And I want to
feeling much better as far as being able to breathe.
Yeah, and I don't mean to cut you off, and I want to get to that. So you run into these alien, and they don't show this part in the movie, and I wish they would have, because it's fascinating to me. And what you said is the first thing I thought of. I thought maybe the Greys. Here's my theory. Here's my hillbilly theory. Maybe the Greys went back and said, "This guy's freaking out. Send in someone that looks more human-like."
Yeah.
So he won't freak out. But what do you think, Travis? I mean, you were there. I mean, I don't know. You were there. Do you think it was a separate entity that you ran into, or do you think they were presenting themselves as human to get you to calm down a little bit and stop fighting?
Well, the first alternative you offered there is probably just the most simplest. That there being, I think, quite a wide variety of types of beings visiting this planet, and probably quite a bit of intercommunication amongst them, as distinct from having very limited communication with Earth people. And so the easiest thing would just be find somebody that can gain his trust and get him back under anesthesia and get these medical problems dealt with.
Well, what's fascinating is you do, and I don't know the alien community as much as I know the Bigfoot world, but I know in the alien community, there is a type of alien that looks more human-like. What do they call it? They call it the...
Well, nowadays they're calling them Nordics, but I don't think they had that term back then. As well, the term Greys, I don't think they had that term. I'd never heard such a thing. And I never even described them as being, quote, gray. It was some grayish white, maybe. They were very pale in their coloring.
And when you looked into the eyes of those beings, I mean, could you see there was intelligence, or was it just black?
Oh, there was definitely an intelligence. It wasn't just black, and I know many people describe them as having just a solid black eye, but these beings definitely had an iris, a pupil, eyelids that blinked, and it's my theory that they're being there in their own environment, that they at that point didn't need the kind of black eye covering that probably explains the appearance of other ones that are called Greys. That see, anything with really large eyes is probably something that exists for most of the time in a very low light environment. Something that lives deep under the sea, or a cave-dwelling animal, or something that's strictly nocturnal, is more likely to have a very large eye. So these large eyes on this type of beings, the so-called Greys, suggest to me, and even their pallor, the paleness suggests low levels of light. And so in their own comfortable environment, would not have this sort of sunglasses kind of a filter even necessary. So that could be one explanation.
The whole story fascinates me. So you run into, you end up acting like you're going to fight these Greys, even though you're really in no condition to fight. but you put up a good fight, and they leave. So you leave the room, you go into this other room, and you run into a human-looking creature, but he doesn't talk to you. He never once even says anything to you. Did you, when you walked up to him, and I know because I've heard you talk about it in interviews, and I got your book, but you're trying to communicate with this guy. You're like, let's get the hell out of here.
Right.
And did he ever look at you, or did his expression ever change when he...
Yeah, his expression did change. It seemed to be, sort of a sympathetic but sort of a tolerant attitude because, here I'm acting hysterical. I'm basically a raving maniac, so he's not communicating, but, I thought mostly likely because of this helmet that he was wearing. And thinking, well, maybe he can't talk with that on or hear clearly with it on. So, I wasn't too alarmed by the lack of response to my questioning. Even though I was out of my mind and hysterical and yelling, I kind of on one level understood that I wasn't exactly something to have a calm conversation with. So I went with him. It was clear to me that, he was going to lead me out of there, and that was exactly what I wanted, get me out of here.
Well, and here's the interesting part of the story. So when you met up with this guy, you guys walked, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Travis, but you guys walk out of the craft you were in almost into a bigger craft, like it had been docked. Mm-hmm. And I know you had mentioned several times you could almost breathe, like the air was, you could finally breathe some air.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And do you think that was because of the atmosphere in that other craft compared to this cramped little disc you were in being kind of stuffy? Do you think it was just more airflow going through there, or do you think it was more of...
There could have actually been a much higher level of oxygen. There had to have been some oxygen in there. I mean, it was possible to survive, but it just seemed easier breathing once we exited that craft. And
the other question I want to ask you, sorry, I felt like such a fanboy. I'm like, let me ask you. Mm-hmm. The humanoid creature you ran into, the entity, could he pass for a human? If you threw a jacket on him and let him walk down the street?
Yeah, he certainly could, yeah. He would pass for human. Once I saw more of his kind together, it was kind of odd to me that they had a sort of a resemblance. Even though this guy might have, stood out a little bit from people, when you see a bunch of them together and they're all similar and like family sort of resemblance, that's kind of odd. You don't normally see that. When we encounter a group of adults, they can vary pretty dramatically in their appearance.
That's interesting. So you thought that it actually looked like these were his siblings because they had similar appearance?
Yeah, some kind of a similarity that was, greater than chance.
And so he walks you back, and I can put myself in your position. I mean, him looking human-like, I probably would have followed him too. But they lead you back, and then what happens next? And do you ever see the Greys again?
No, I didn't ever see the Greys again. I think not to say that I know for sure they weren't continuing to be involved, but whether these human-looking individuals completely took over what I think was probably some sort of a medical process, something involved in trying to correct the damage done from that blast of energy, or whether, they turned me back to the custody of these small creatures. Maybe their technology was better at dealing with the problem. But I do believe that, that feeling of being wounded, was the main factor there, that the difference between how I felt once I was rendered unconscious there to when I came to again.
Well, explain that. So they walk you into a room, this guy, you're walking with him, and what happens? You walk into a room full of human-looking, kind of similar and what happens?
Well, the beings that he left me with did not wear helmets like him. So at that point, there was no more reason to think that they would have any justifiable reason not to respond to my questions. Because I was, extremely anxious, even though I was in the custody of what I believed to be rescuing humans. Still, it's reasonable to expect you're going to tell me what are you doing with me? What's becoming of me? Am I going to be okay? What's going on? And to get nothing in response sort of started renewing my panic and fear about what was in store for me.
And so what happens next? He walks you into this room, you see other humans, or human-like creatures, and what happens next? What do they do next?
Well, they tried to get me to lay on this table, and, I'd just come off of a table where I felt extremely trapped, and I was not going to cooperate until they would tell me something, So I started saying, I'm not doing this. You got to tell me what are you doing? What are you doing with me? And they wouldn't answer, and they were trying to force me on the table then. And so then I started really resisting, and I was in a pretty weakened state, and I think they were probably pretty strong beings. They felt very strong and didn't really have that much trouble getting me down on that table, putting this mask over my face, which caused me to lose unconsciousness. So, it's nothing special, just a mask like an oxygen mask. No hoses that I could see connected to it, but something in it caused me to lose consciousness.
Do you wake up on the road after that?
Yeah, I woke up on the road. But, how soon after? I had no way of knowing how much time had passed. Was this mere minutes after? Probably not, because, that pain and feeling of being wounded was gone. But, was it a matter of hours, days? At that point, I had no clue how long I'd been gone. Once I made my way to phone booth and my family came to get me, they could tell that I was under the impression this was still the same night as when the incident began. But that's when I learned that 5 days had gone by.
And that's a part, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to ask you that, because I'm sure at the time you weren't thinking about pain or how much pain you were in, but looking back now at that moment, you weren't as much pain as you were on the ship. It's almost like they fixed you.
Right. That's what I think, happened.
Yeah.
And, because of the memory of the level of fear and panic that I was in, it was a lasting trauma, that stayed with me for quite some time. It took me, months, actually years probably, to just really, come to connect with the idea that what happened there had to do with trying to correct the damage that this blast of energy had caused.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you that because I always thought, you hear people being abducted and, they're almost like a lab rat. But in your case, it almost seems like, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I wasn't there, but it almost seems like they were trying to help you. They were trying to fix what, maybe some new guy pressed a button and you got hit with the laser and they were like, well, we gotta, we can't leave him here. We gotta, it almost feels like they were trying to help you. I mean, do you feel that way now or do you feel like...
Yeah, because, although whatever the circumstances were, it seems to have been an accident. I'm sure they would have better ways of, incapacitating. If all they did was just want to take somebody aboard, I don't think they would use that powerful of a blast. I do think it was some kind of an accident, some kind of unexpected thing that caused a degree of harm beyond what was expected. And then, the nearest hospital was over an hour away. Probably what happened there would have been permanently fatal. without their intervention with technology that was capable of reversing that incredible level of trauma.
Do you ever look back now as not the young man Travis, but, you know, after time has gone by, and do you ever look back and go, I wish that would have never happened? I wish that night would have never, because it's kind of a double-edged sword, you know, because you have become the face of, I don't want to say alien encounters, but you really have. You've opened the door for people who didn't have the heart to come out and talk about either an abduction or seeing something, and you were kind of one of the guys to step forward and say, hey, you know, not necessarily by choice, but you step forward and say, hey, this happened to me. Do you ever look back on it and go, if I could go back in time, I would have avoided that whole situation. I would have never got out of the truck. I would have told Mike to go the opposite direction.
Absolutely. You know, in spite of, you know, you always have to try to make the best of any situation and go forward. You know, I'd still rather it never happen, but, you know, facing and coming to grips with the fact that it did happen and there's no escaping it. I can't undo what happened. I've got to move forward and make the best of it as best I can. So, you know, I've kind of, you know, been on a mission, so to speak, not to sound, you know, highfalutin, but, you know, a determination to educate as many people and try to make something good come of it, to help people realize it's just a real fundamental thing, that this phenomenon is real, that we're not alone in the universe, and that, you know, as hard as it was to come to the conclusion that it's probably not any sinister intention. You know, I've thought long and hard about this, decades, and I really think that if they had any bad intentions, we'd never know what hit us. I mean, with that level of technology, if they wanted planet Earth for themselves, there'd be nothing we could do about it. You know, the idea that they would need to carry on some sinister plot that would take decades is just ridiculous to me. So, also, the mere fact that they would possess the kind of technology on such a vast scale, that if they had not grown well beyond the sort of warlike and you know, tendencies that humans have, they would have destroyed themselves. So the mere fact that they're still alive, still there, means that they've gotten beyond that. And you know, I've always had a faith that doing good is the smart thing to do. And if they are so much smarter than us, then probably their moral and ethical development has kept pace with their technological progress.
What do you think that they are? Do you think it's really another life form from a different planet, or do you get the sense that this was something else?
Yeah, you know, I do think that they are. That's the most likely, the simplest explanation, that they are another life form from another planet. Probably not traveling in any conventional way we would recognize, but you got to take into consideration just how advanced they could be. You know, it's been pointed out that almost everything technological that we have is only a few hundred years old. And if you can picture that we've come this far in that short a period of time, how far would we or them be able to go in hundreds of thousands of years, millions? I mean, who could begin to guess what kinds of advances that would be made? And the ability to move from place to place could take some surprising forms for a technology that advanced. It could involve something that we might call interdimensional or time travel or something of that nature. You know, the basic laws of physics become anybody's game at that point. There's so far beyond anything we can begin to imagine. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it?
People that try to explain it away will know this can't be. I don't want it to be. So, try to explain it as something else. So.
Well, you have to realize too, it's uncomfortable to hear a Travis Walton story. It's very uncomfortable because it's out of our norm. It's like hearing a Bigfoot encounter. It's not supposed to be. That's not supposed to be here. And it's the same thing with these. Did anyone come to you from the government and tell you to shut your mouth? Quit talking about this? Not
to me, but I think some of the crew got indications that to try to suppress it, and there, basically most of it came in the form of attacks in the public to try to discredit us and, fundamental basic propaganda techniques, ridicule, character assassination, just the stuff you see in politics every day.
Well, the problem is it doesn't fit too well, it's almost like if I didn't believe in aliens and someone was telling me, well, there's a fault line up there on the Mongolian Rim and lightning came down, and it just makes more sense that maybe an alien ship actually did show up. You know what I mean? It's like you try so hard to explain away.
Everything they tried to throw at us, was explainable away in a way that made the explainer seemed kind of silly to even be put this forward, to try to claim that it was any form of hallucination is absurd because 7 people are just not going to have the same hallucination. Right. Never mind that I had medical tests through official agencies that proved there wasn't a trace of any drug in my body whatsoever.
Well, and that always cracks me up because you hear that in Bigfoot encounters. They're like, what were you smoking? What were you drinking? Listen, I've drank a lot and I've smoked a lot in my life, and I've never had delusions of grandeur about aliens so it's such a ridiculous argument that sometimes these skeptics come forward with, trying to say, well, they were on something, or 7 guys aren't going to all, like you said, 7 guys aren't going to all hallucinate the same story. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and just explanation after explanation just flies in the face of documentable facts.
It's so thankful you showed back up, or they let you go, because my heart did go out to those guys. Because when you watch the movie, I can almost put myself in that position, and I'm sure all of those guys felt guilt for leaving you, and then you vanished. And they're trying to explain this craft, and they're trying to explain. And if I was a law enforcement at that time, I would look at these guys, especially that Dallas character, and I'd be like, one of these guys killed Travis. Yeah. And we're going to find out real quick who it is.
Well, because, one of the fundamental questions in the polygraph series was, did you have any harmful intentions toward Travis? And a few days before that, we had actually got into a physical fight. He was going to flunk that, even though he did not kill me. It would make him look guilty. So, that led to quite a bit of conflict between him and law enforcement people. And to picture what they went through, John, traveling down the street and having people yell out, "Where'd you hide the body?" And, murderer and that sort of thing. To, imagine Steve, his own mother thinking that he might have killed me, because it was easier to believe that a murder had occurred than that such a thing could be encountered. Yeah. And so once he passed the lie detector test, he goes to her and says, "See, I told you we didn't murder him." And she says, "Well, okay, maybe you did see something, but it wasn't aliens, it was demons." If you really don't want to believe something,
you'll find an answer for something.
You'll find a way to concoct a reason not to believe it.
Yeah. And that's why I say my heart goes out to those guys, because I could put myself in that position and trying to convince. There's even a scene in the movie, and I don't know if it happened in real life or not. You have to take all that with a grain of salt. But where Mike's wife Mike was your good friend. At least in the movie, that's how they portrayed it. You guys were good buds. And his wife almost questioning him.
Yeah.
And was it his sister-in-law? Is that who?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was asking him, and when you watch that scene, man, your heart's got to go out to Mike, because he's telling the truth, and no one believes him.
Oh, yeah.
Even his loved ones don't.
And some of my family accusing them of.
Your brother wasn't your brother?
One of my brothers was thinking that they had committed a murder. So. The whole question of murder hanging over the thing to begin with is just really put the community in a panic and added to the pressure for these guys that is just over the top. So, like, how do you deal with such a thing? It's nothing like anybody they've ever heard of. Dr. Harder, pointed out that if you had 6 people come in and say that they had witnessed a murder, and they're all telling the same story, that's practically open and shut. And if these 6 people all pass lie detector tests, I mean, that's good enough to convict somebody of murder and have them be given the death penalty.
Yeah.
But somehow when it involves aliens, they still, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
And so it'll never be good enough. For people who don't want to believe it, they'll always come up with a way.
Well, what's fascinating? I told you this earlier when you and I were talking, and I'll say it to you now. My dad was the biggest skeptic on the planet. He didn't believe in Bigfoot, didn't believe in aliens, didn't believe in nothing. And I remember I watched the movie Fire in the Sky. My dad goes, "Oh yeah, I remember back when that was on the news. I remember those guys." And I asked him, I said, "Dad, what do you think?" And my father was the biggest skeptic on the planet. He goes, "I believe those guys. I think what they said happened actually happened." And that, I know that doesn't mean much to you, but it meant a lot to me, because I was like, holy crap, man, this guy, my dad was skeptic, man, hard-nosed skeptic. He'd be the guy saying it was swamp gas, it was Venus, it was lightning strikes. He was that guy. And I remember he was like, "Oh yeah, I remember when that was on the news. Yeah, when Travis disappeared." And he goes, "I believe those guys. I think what he says happened actually happened." And I was so taken back by that. But it's such a compelling story, because the minute you try and take apart the story, just like you and I were talking, it becomes ridiculous. It almost becomes more ridiculous than maybe what you said happened actually happened, because you're trying so hard to explain away. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, well, back then, anybody who believed in life from other worlds they fit into what was, pretty much generally recognized as being a kook.
Yeah.
But based on actual science today, you got to come face to face with the if the definition of a kook is someone who believes something at odds with prevailing scientific opinion, it's the person who thinks we're alone in the universe who fits the definition of kook.
I would agree. Yeah. Because it makes no sense. You're right. How did this affect you later in life? I mean, because you had to deal with, because there's got to be PTSD from this. There has to be PTSD from this, from what you went through, all the nonsense with people thinking you went on a vacation for 5 days, and I know you've had every dick in the world come along and say, well, he's trying to make a buck, he's trying to do this. Beyond all of that, just the experience itself, how did that affect you throughout your life?
Well, I had to get on with my life and make a living, and so it became a problem. I think there were many times where I didn't get the job or the promotion just on account of something that happened to me years before. So it was just, it's always been an ongoing battle, and I think over time I'm slowly making some kind of progress in that regard in terms of people in immediate contact with my life and with the wider world in general. And like I said, it's kind of my mission, my goal in going forward. I certainly can't unlive it, can't change what happened, so I've got to do what I can to just try to make something good come of it.
No, I understand. And that's very respectable, by the way. But I wanted the other question I want to ask you is, do you think the government's covering it up, and why? And it seems like a ridiculous question to ask, because on the surface, there were 6 of you guys, right? Was there 6 or 7?
There were 7 of us all together. Yeah.
So you got 7 guys who are out there in lumber that get taken away in a ship, and you're telling me the government doesn't know about it. You know, it seems almost ridiculous to even think of a thing. But do you think that they're covering up, and do you have a feeling why?
Well, I think the government definitely knows more than we do, because they're collecting a lot of knowledge. They don't share with everyone. But I don't agree with people who think this automatically implies that the government has some nefarious motive. I really think, for the most part, the motive is probably in our own best interest. You know, when I analyze all the reasons they might want to, conceal what they do know, it has to do with the fact that, unfortunately, we do have geopolitical enemies that might be sort of discouraged from any temptation to launch a sneak attack or something if they are kept uncertain about what level of technology our government might have recovered from some of these crashes or whatever. So I don't believe that our government's in cahoots with some nefarious alien species that's, slowly planning on taking over the earth. I think that's absurd.
So the government's more like a bystander. They know what's going on. They probably know more than we do, but they're not in bed with what's going on.
Anything that, all these people say, they should just open the books and share with us everything, just because they want to know. Yeah. But you got to realize that whatever they share with the American public is automatically shared with our enemies too.
That's true.
And it would be foolish for them to let that information out. Not only what we do know, but to the extent to what we don't know.
Yeah.
Keep the enemy guessing, and it gives you some degree of safety in that.
Yeah. Well, Travis Walton, everyone. I told the audience I would do my best to get an interview with them, and he was gracious enough to come in and retell the story. I know I played the interview of him talking about his encounter, and a lot of people were a little taken back. They were like, "Oh, that wasn't in the movie." Well, the movie's that's Hollywood, when you hear the real story. But go to TravisWalton.com. And check out Travis's site. The other thing, too, is go to Amazon. Get Fire in the Sky.
No, Amazon's not a good place. The only place to really get the book is from me at TravisWalton.com.
TravisWalton.com, okay.
Any copies you might run into on Amazon are just someone's used copy, and usually overpriced.
Like $175 for the book.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, so get a copy from Travis Walton, his website, TravisWalton.com. Just Google it's the first one that comes up. But Travis, it was an honor. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I think what you do now, you took a bad situation and turned it into something good. I think most people, if they would have gone through what you've gone through, they probably would be an alcoholic. I think it's human nature. But you've turned it around into something positive, and it was a huge honor to...
Well, I think, Sasquatch experiencers probably undergo a sort of a parallel kind of experience, and maybe something that's happened in the course of my fighting back against the skeptics might be useful to people who've encountered creatures or, things they can't explain out there.
Yeah. Well, it was a huge honor having you on. Thank you again, Travis.
All right. Have a good one.
$300! would you shut up about the car?
Hey, and another thing, how do you know where I live?
Let's just say we're related, Biff. And that being the case, I got a little present for you. Something that'll make you rich. You want to be rich, don't you?
Oh, yeah, sure, right. That's rich. You're gonna make me rich?
You see this book? This book tells the future. It tells the results of every major sports event till the end of the century. Football, baseball, horse races, boxing. The information in here is worth millions, and I'm giving it to you.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you very much. Now, why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
It's leave, you idiot. Make like a tree and leave. You sound like a damn fool when you say it wrong.
All right, then, leave! And take your book with you.
Don't you get it? You could make a fortune with this book. Let me show you.
Yard line, UCLA trails 17-16. It's 4th and 11 with only 18 seconds left in this game. I'd say it's all over for UCLA.
Bet you $1 million UCLA wins at 19-17.
What are you, deaf, old man? He just said it was over. You lost.
Over to Bradley.
Oh, yeah.
Back to place kick formation. Here comes Decker with a kick. It's up. It looks good, folks. It looks very good. Field goal. UCLA wins 19-17. Listen to that Coliseum crowd go wild. Jim Decker, senior head.
All right, Pops, what's the gag? How did you know what the score was going to be?
I told you, it's in this book. All you got to do is bet on the winner, and you'll never lose.
Got a new sponsor for the show. It's MyBookie, mybookie.ag. They were kind enough to approach me and say, hey, we like what you do. We think it's really cool. And we'd like to be a part of it and sponsor the show. So I hope everyone gets out there. Check it out. MyBookie. You don't have to be Biff. You don't have to commit grand theft auto of a DeLorean and petty theft of a sports almanac to get ahead. Join now, and MyBookie will match your deposit dollar for dollar. Use promo code Chronicles to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today. That's MyBookie. And don't forget to use the promo code Chronicles when creating your account to claim the bonus. You play, you win, you get paid. MyBookie.ag. And if you're listening to it, thank you to MyBookie for approaching me for a sponsorship. It means a lot to me. Very cool of you guys to say, hey, we like the show. We want to be a part of it. You know, we think what you're doing is cool. So I hope the listeners go out there, check out MyBookie. I know I'll be on there. And if everything works out like I think it is, I think I might give up podcasting and just take up gambling full time. It's very cool. They lay out the odds and lay it all for it. It's almost like having a sports almanac. So I hope you guys check it out. MyBookie. Thank you guys. Next up, I did an interview with Adam Davis, and we talked about his recent expeditions, things that he's done, and we'll talk a little bit about the Neanderthal. We'll talk a little bit about the orang pendek and some of the different adventures Adam's been on. It's been a while since he's been on the show, so I hope you guys enjoy my interview with Adam. Adam, how are you, man?
I'm very well. I've had a really good time at this.
Yeah, no, it was a blast. I wish I would have seen your presentation.
You would have enjoyed it, man. I would have taught you how to hunt a crocodile. We could do that if you want, Wes.
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk because it's been a couple of years since you've been on the show.
Uh-huh.
And I always love talking to you. You're always off to some adventure like Indiana Jones somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But what's been new with you? Or you mentioned some expeditions. Do you want to tell us what's
Yeah, I've been focusing because I'm based in San Diego at the moment. I've been focusing. There's a good opportunity to do some research in North America, and I'll tell you a little bit about that if you like. If that's all right.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Yeah, a couple of things that really I think people would be interested in, your listeners would be interested. One of them is I did an investigation in an area called Port Chatham. Now, if you read about this, Port as in P-O-R-T, Chatham as in C-H-A-T-H-A-M, look it up, because it reads like something out of a Stephen King novel before I went there, only it's real. So the story is that between the 1920s to the 1950s, more specifically then, though, this was a thriving little fishing town in Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula, and they were doing well. But then things started to kill them. And these things they describe, and you can look at this, it is an objective, it's not my slant, the hairy man. They talk about a Bigfoot-like creature wanting to kill them. So there's a guy, Stephen Major, Extreme Expeditions. He asked me if I'd go in there as a tracker and do that. I mean, it's very expensive to get in there. The boat alone cost $1,000 in and $1,000 out, so I wasn't doing it on my money, Wes.
Yeah, I hear you.
But it was dangerous, to go in. There was a lot of talk from the Alaskans about it being a dangerous place and dangerous to get in, even with the water. So it was ideal for me. It floated my boat. I like to do things that other people haven't done before, or have an air of adventure or mystery or explanation. I like to go to places no one's ever crossed before, with all these jungles and mountains. So this was something I could do, and I'd not been to Alaska, and I liked the frontier aspect of going to this.
Yeah.
And because there's nobody now, because the town was abandoned because of this. There's nobody within 20 miles or so, at least.
Interesting.
This area, and I thought it was a great adventure.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, you shouldn't go there. Like, even when we got to Alaska, it's dangerous, man. That thing the ancestors of this thing could still be out there.
Yeah, and before you go into it, I don't want to cut you off, Adam, but was it killing people?
Yeah,
or did they
allegedly.
Oh, okay.
Allegedly. I mean, they were convinced enough, so the accounts go, that this thing was killing people, so that they abandoned the town. These are the accounts that anybody can read. They said, you know what, we've had enough, and that was just the end of that. so it sounds quite a bit. I mean, it's a bizarre story, and that's why it piqued my interest. I'm not going to go and do stuff where many other people have been before. That doesn't intrigue me. I like to go somewhere where there's a new and cutting edge, and that was what I was about. Yeah,
and that's fascinating. So when you got there, what did you find? I mean, was there anything that you uncovered?
When I got there, the first thing is that the place does have a creepy vibe, but you kind of expect that in an area where there's a lot of old abandoned buildings, and there's a lot of bears there. So it was very, very hard work. In fact, Stephen's a bit of a gadget man, and he built all these perimeter things, So if something come along, we'd be it'd be like, able to spot
alarms.
Yeah, like all this. And the only right, and he built that. Good on him. He's a tough guy. It was hard work. It was very intense. Adventure. But the reason I'm laughing is the only time they didn't work was when I left them on his own to get the trail cams, and he was like, he comes back and he goes, "Damn these things!" But so it was a very intense little trip. I mean, you could tell that the wildlife. When I go to remote areas, Nepal, Sumatra, wherever else, you see a big difference, a very obvious difference between the flora and fauna and how it behaves and reacts to humanity. And what does that mean in this context? So, for example, there was a lot of sea otters there. And what they'd do is they'd come in and they'd stop, because I was on a beach area, So rather than the town itself, they'd stop and they'd look, and they'd call these noises, otter noises, like, and then they'd be showing their babies, look at the humans, and then they'd swim off. So we were something of an interest to them. In terms of actual physical evidence with Bigfoot, the only thing that I thought was interesting, and I'd put it at that higher bar, was we're using some night vision equipment. I made a call, and while I was using it, I saw something large move down the woods on the other side of the embankment I was on. I couldn't determine its physical shape, so I can't tell you that it's even possibly a Bigfoot, but I can tell you it was an animal that was moving in response to my calls, my vocalizations, and then as it moved farther and farther down, I saw it pause, and then it stopped and static, and you can put two and two together sometimes and make five, but it almost appeared to be listening. But other than that, there was nothing in terms of evidence where I said, that is something that really persuades me. It was a good adventure, a good investigation. He's going to go back there and do more research, but I enjoyed it.
I need to look up the history of that town, because that is fascinating. I mean, everyone to get up and just go.
It's weird.
There's this weird story about this hairy creature that's killing people. There's always, even in myths, there's always some truth.
Yeah, and the stories seem to be consistent. I mean, I've not seen anyone refute it yet.
Yeah.
I mean, they may do, but I've not seen. It's always and the local Alaskans tell that same story, which was interesting. And I like the frontier element to Alaska. I mean, it's one of those places. I was sat in a bar, and I was just talking to one of the locals about some mountains I could see in the distance, and I said, "Well, you been over to those mountains?" And he's like, "No, probably nobody around here has been up to them." I'm sure somebody has, but there was that element that you just can't get, I don't think, in any other place.
Yeah, it's very untouched, very pure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you leave there and you went, was it North Carolina where you did the...
Yeah, I went to North Carolina specifically because I've got a good friend, Mike Richberg, and I was interested in his account of what happened in the swamps with his father. Now, Mike's a good friend of mine, so I know him very, very well. He's not somebody who would deal in hyperbole. He's a decent guy.
Yeah.
And I believe him when he says things. And he's told me a story for a while about when he was a teenager, he used to go out hunting with his daddy, as he would say in the South. You're going to have to endure my southern accent. but he would go out hunting with his daddy, and when he was a teenager, I think they had dogs, and they were releasing dogs. They were hunting hog. He saw a Bigfoot. He wasn't planning it, wasn't interested in the subject, but it was moving away, yeah? Obviously to get away from the hunt. But he saw it moving. He said it was like a big gorilla. And it had the sagittal crest we're all familiar with, and all your listeners. And it freaked him out. And it freaked him out so much, he didn't go into those woods for 5 years. And he used to go in. He used to go in all the time, and it's his research area. And he saw one as well. Again, I can't remember exactly, but it was decades later in the same area. So that. And he was out there a lot by that stage, but he saw it once, and that interested me. Here's somebody who I think it's not a will first. Other people research the area, but I believed in the veracity of his account because I knew him very, very well, and I wanted to research that. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, there was, and we did. I mean, the swamps there are hard going, swamps in that area. But it did make me laugh. There was one time when we were out there. And he was just joking around, but we were being quiet. We were observing, and we were we were seeing what wildlife was going to come along. And Mike turns around and goes, and we see a pig, a wild pig, and Mike goes, "That hog sure got a pretty mouth." And I said, "Don't be saying that, Mike. It sounds like Deliverance."
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. Did you guys find anything out there?
No. I mean, I laid some trail cams down. But there was nothing tangible. I mean, and I think that's a general point. There's two things I'd say. I'm very suspicious of people who go out on all their investigations and regularly find things. I don't care how good they are. They're not going to find anything. These creatures are very, very rare, and you have to be extremely lucky. And also, it's important to analyze the quality of the evidence that you find. So, for example, I was in Canada and on Vancouver Island, and I shot something through the FLIR, the night vision equipment, and it looked like something that had locomotion. But if I had released it, what it essentially was a red blob in the distance, and said, and I tried to say it was Bigfoot, that would be ludicrous.
Right.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And anything associated with Bigfoot, in order for it to be of scientific interest, it has to be of an extremely high standard. And you must get all the time, I know I do, so I'm sure you do, photographs of bushes, blobs, all that. Yeah, it's like, man, I don't...
And it gets old, sometimes that gets old because when you actually run into one, you don't have to sit and squint your eyes and look at a picture, it's there. I do get those a lot.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
Sure. And if,
I'm just happy people are out there snapping pictures.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I think I would quite happily. I think you're absolutely right to make that point. It's quite important to snap as many pictures as you can because you don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
But if you do get a black blob, then don't get all hissy if somebody says, well, all I can see is a black bulb.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. So this guy sends me this picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's low lit conditions. And I was like, holy crap. When I saw it, I was like, wow, it looks like it's squatting down. I mean, it looked like wide shoulders and it was squatting down. And he goes, yeah, that's a pretty amazing picture, isn't it? And he was kind of smirking a little bit. And I was like, yeah, it was like you don't see all the details, but there's something large sitting there. He goes, it's a tree stump. And he goes, the tree stump, he goes, the reason why I took a picture of it is because it looks just like a Sasquatch squatting down. And it had the form. It's like one of those rare trees. It had like the form of it. And it even had like moss coming off. So it looked like it had a little hair on the shoulders. And but I started laughing. He's like, yeah, it's a tree stump. He's like, you know what? He goes, I saw it. And he goes, I thought it looked like a Bigfoot. Thought I'd snap a picture of it. But he doesn't post it and say it's a Bigfoot.
No.
He lets you know it's a tree stump. But.
Well, that's good. At least he doesn't try and make out it's something.
But it's just kind of funny. It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen that one picture on the internet of that tree, and it's got the arms.
Yeah, I know exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can see anything in something, But I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's totally fine. I mean, your point is a good one because it's that pareidolia thing. It's the human brain wants to see patterns,
right?
And so you want to see those things, but it's an important point. So you must have done it. Well, I've done investigations, and it's a bit depressing if you hear every strange noise and somebody goes next to you, it's a Bigfoot. You just think, it's going to be a long night, yeah?
Yeah.
Bigfoots are extremely rare. It's almost certainly not a Bigfoot. And before you even think about that conclusion, your starting point has to be, what else could it possibly be that's far more plausible? When you hear a noise or when you see a tree structure, for example. I keep seeing people sending me tree structures, and then you look at the just basic research. You look at there's a tree structure. Well, where was it? Well, how far were you from your car? I was about 10 minutes, and you find out there's a load of Boy Scouts.
Right.
Don't tell me it's a Bigfoot,
Right.
You've got to physically see these things. If you see a Bigfoot physically making it, then you can say it's a Bigfoot.
Right.
Until then, you can't.
Yeah, and I don't want to discourage people from going out there and snapping pictures, though. Like you said, man, I'm happy people are out there and keep snapping away, because one day it's going to take one of those people that's going to get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, again, I agree with you. I think that's a good point. I think it's far more likely to... there's never an ego thing for me. I don't care who finds it, as long as we get the evidence. I think that it's far more likely for the person who is most likely to get some really interesting evidential point is somebody who hits one by accident on the car.
Yeah.
Or somebody who's out walking with their kids one day in the forest and they take a great picture, which is worthy of further scientific research. Not us guys creeping around in the woods, because I think that's more realistic. There are so many people wandering around. That's the likeliest chance, especially these days with camera phones. Everyone's got a camera with them, haven't they? So that's the most likely scenario.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I was laughing at your expedition thing, because I went on a property one time and we're walking down the trail, and the homeowner, he points to 2 sticks and he goes, let's see that. And I look down on the ground. I go, yeah. He goes, Bigfoot did that. And I was like, it's going to be... I thought when I started... I was muted out. No one could hear me, but I was laughing when he said it's going to be a long night. That's the first thing that I thought it was going to be. It's going to be a long day, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, and I had someone on... I'm normally very careful about who I go on expeditions with, but I was meeting this group of people, and I was invited along just for an hour or two to be sociable. I'm not going to name them because they were nice people, but this is a classic example of I'll give you a classic example of somebody wanting something. And this woman was there. She said, "I can see eye shine. I can see eye shine." I was like, "That's the moon." And she said, "No, it's eye shine." And she's getting a bit angsty with me. And I physically, in a nice way, led her over to away from the trees and pointed her physically at the moon and said, "Look, there's the moon."
Yeah.
I was like, it was Bigfoot,
I think sometimes with people, I think what ends up happening is maybe a little PTSD, like they've had an encounter. Mm-hmm. And so when they hear something, that's Bigfoot. You know what I mean? Because they're immediately, you get charged. It's like the guy coming back from Iraq and he hears... firecrackers goes off, and all of a sudden he's right there and he's freaking out over nothing. And I kind of liken that to some of these people. I think, I don't think it's intentionally, like, I don't think it's an intentional feeling for them to say, oh, that's Bigfoot, that's Bigfoot.
No.
I think in their mind they feel that way, but I think it's almost like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. You know what I'm trying, like PTSD, like they've had an encounter and now they hear something and so they start freaking out again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Could be that, I don't know.
No, I think most people don't go into it with the intention of frauding. I think there are some who do, for whatever nefarious reason. But I just think that they're excited. Yeah, and that's what happens. You go out there, and they want to come back with something. Yeah? Right. But I think that field researchers who do it a lot, who are dedicated, know that that's very, very unrealistic, or I hope they do. Yeah. I in my life, I've done this stuff for decades, and I can only think of, 3 times when I had something happen that was significant in all those years, and that's the norm. I was talking earlier on during my presentation. I think I mentioned the fact that when I was in Mongolia, I made a couple of expeditions in Mongolia, one to the desert and one to the western side near Kazakhstan. And one of the times I was there, I was speaking to this guy who was responsible for a wildlife conservation area, and he said, we've got clouded leopard here. And I said, well, how often have you seen them? Because obviously they're very rare. And he said, well, I've seen them once in like 30 years. Wow. And I think that is far more a realistic proposition. You were very blessed, and I'm glad for you. But it's extremely, extremely hard to see these things, isn't it?
Yeah, I would agree with you, and that speaks to the simple fact of how do most encounters happen? They happen by accident.
Yeah.
Rarely have I had a researcher that's like, yeah, we were in the heart of it, and all of a sudden it came charging at us, and you never hear those stories. No. What you hear is I was out hiking, I was out hunting, I was out camping, and I ran into it. But I don't know, you and I disagree on the rare thing. I don't think they're quite as rare as most people might think, because that or more and more people are starting to see them, or their population has grown. Something's going on, because it seems like more and more people are seeing them. I do believe that they're rare in the sense that they're not stupid, and they generally won't walk into your trap. They're too smart for it.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the short answer is we don't know. And
right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Both of us are speculating. I mean, while you were making that point, one of the things I was thinking about just then is how some species can adapt. And the classic example is leopards in India, which have adapted very well to human urbanization and encroachment and have become very effective in it. If I think of my own country, Britain, foxes. So there are some creatures that can adapt, and that might be a possibility why people are seeing them more. But it's all just fun guesswork, really, at this stage.
Yeah, it is. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's like I always say, no one has one in their garage they're studying. So
no.
Tell us about the San Diego. Was it San Diego Zoo?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting story. So Cliff was contacted by someone at the zoo to set the scene. The zoo is one entity, and that's right in the heart of the city of San Diego. But there's a wildlife park, which I think, off the top of my head, is about 40 miles away. And it's not in an urbanized area. It's not true wilderness like Alaska, but it's on the edge of the Cleveland National Forest. And that isn't a forest, just so people know. It's more sort of scrub. San Diego's very dry for those people who don't know the area. And so it's more like that. And basically, I'm still investigating this, so this is still ongoing, but I like the fact that this was... the guy who was my contact, he was involved in security at the park, and they'd had encounters where they'd heard strange screams at night, and they'd outside the perimeter of the park, and then like stones and things like that had been thrown as well, and they'd found it very, very strange indeed, and they really weren't sure what was going on. They then had the strangest thing of all happen, which was that there was a woman who worked the park, who will remain, none of these people right now will remain anonymous, but she worked the park. And it was 3 a.m, and she was going, and he took me to the spot where this woman allegedly saw something. And she was wandering in a car over to the wildlife park to start a shift. And across the road, on all fours, she saw a gorilla. Outside the park, a gorilla-like creature. Boom, 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 boom. And I've got the record at the time, but it freaked her out. And she contacted the zoo, and they counted all their animals. But, imagine, escaped gorilla. But none of the creatures had escaped. And she got some stick, for it. But I thought that was a very interesting...
And that was in the Cleveland?
It was just where the wildlife, right where the safari park is.
Oh, okay.
So right, the wildlife safari park, it's only about, where this happened is about a mile away from it, yeah?
Yeah.
And obviously they have that, I thought that was an interesting encounter. And there are a couple of things that I'd say to add to it, why I think it's even more interesting. The first one is this is an obvious one, in the sense that this is somebody who is well familiar with seeing great apes very regularly. Yeah. So it's not to denigrate anyone's account, but I think that adds credibility to our account. The second thing is that this is there are no bears. The classic thing is it a bear? And sightings of bears do not occur around here. Yeah, it's not. There may have been bears wandered in occasionally, I'm sure, from other areas. Yeah. But this was somebody who, bears are virtually non-existent here, and this was somebody who works for a wildlife park who clearly saw a gorilla at 3 a.m.
Interesting. Did she give any details about the face, or was there any details that stood out to you beyond it was just looked like a gorilla?
It was walking on. It was walking. What she said, what he said, because this is it was walking on its knuckles. That sort of thing. Mm. Yeah? And she saw it, and it moved along and looked. She didn't catch a very good look at it, but it was enough for her to be A, convinced it was a gorilla, and B, to officially alert the zoo authorities.
Wow. Yeah, that is.
So it's significant.
Yeah, very significant.
I think, and I think that's an important.
So have you gone back to that area?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, and I intend to do more research there with him. I've had some. He's been moving around on his shift, so it's been quite difficult to get some time. But I want to do some more stakeouts with him and things like that, and see what we can find.
Now that you're in San Diego, do you ever go down south? And go down by the... Have you ever talked to the Border Patrol agents down there?
I have. I've spoken to one of them. I mean, I haven't. I've worked on the border on the US side. Yeah. I had a whole trail cam. I didn't mention that to you earlier, did I? No. I had a whole trail cam project on the border, and this was because... your question's a good one, because the Border Patrol, there's a guy who wrote a book. I can't remember his name.
Rocky Elmore?
Yeah, Rocky Elmore. Yeah, and we spoke about that last time. And you mentioned him to me. So I messaged Rocky not long after we spoke, the last time I spoke to you. And I went and set some trail. It's a bit of an edgy area, some of that border area.
It is.
So I was like, I'm interested. So I set some trail cameras up along the border and worked on the US side of the border. I've not been to the Mexican side.
Yeah.
But I did set trail cameras up. I didn't get anything interesting on them, but I did work the area because, as you know, the Border Patrol reported on several occasions, according to Rocky, seeing what looked like large bipedal creatures, including one time when they were following them on the infrared.
Yeah, and that's actually documented in an official report. Yeah. And they told them not to write Sasquatch in that thing, but they said they went in and reported it, and there were several witnesses to it. The other thing down there, too, I find more fascinating than that, because you're right, Adam, and for people who don't know that area, 100% right. It's like scrub brush. First time I ever went down there, I was like, no way. Mm-hmm. No way. But I guess they're seeing in New Mexico and deserts, so, what do I know? But anyway, they talked about the devil dog and how this devil dog type creature would harass the guys. And one guy actually quit. I think I told you that.
Yeah, you did, yeah.
And but there's weird stuff down there, man. There's one area where it's like the only oak tree probably within 200 miles. Mm. And you come down this one area, and it's just, and I did a whole video on it, but you come down to this one area, and there's this oak tree. it's so out of place for that environment. And I guess there's all kinds of paranormal stuff that goes on down there. They've pulled in there and seen bodies hanging from the trees.
Yeah, it's a very strange place. I mean, and to go to the physiology, because I've thought about it as well, and I think, what you've got in that area is hundreds of square miles of scrub and desert going on to Anza-Borrego, which is not very well populated.
Right.
You've got many accounts going back hundreds of years of Bigfoot-like creatures from the local natives. And of course, the local population did survive in that desert, and large mammals like the bighorn sheep do survive in that desert.
You're right.
So, and there are caves, and there are cave systems. So I was like you, when I first got there, I was like, well, how much? And then I was thinking, well, actually, if I equate the based on my own experience, there's a lot of stories about Almas in Mongolia living in very similar terrain to the one I'm seeing here. So if there are small populations and they're prepared to do a lot of migration to look for resources, then it's not implausible at all.
Yeah, Igor was here. He's the Russian Bigfoot researcher for the audience listening. And the one question I want to ask him, and you probably know this because you've actually been there.
Yeah.
When people talk about the Almas, is it night and day compared to how we describe Bigfoot?
It's very different. I mean, I don't think Igor's been to Mongolia. I've actually been and done the research there, and that's not to denigrate him, but he just hasn't.
Yeah.
So I did a big survey of the Almas. I'm going to give you a long answer because I think you'd be interested in the long
absolutely.
answer. So what I did was, when I went to that western part of Mongolia, I went from all the way down from the southern tip of it all the way up to the northern area. And there were lots of stories about it. But, for example, there was a mountain of the Almas. And,
really?
and I thought I'll go there, but people had not heard of any recent accounts. And eventually I pinned it down. This is a long story behind it, but to a small area around Hovd, H-O-V-D, which is where I did a filming for a National Geographic film called The Last Living Neanderthal. And there only seemed to be maybe 100, 200 square kilometres around there where there'd been any recent sightings and evidence. And what they describe is a bipedal creature. It was very primitive. I spoke to this hunter called Ulzi, and he'd seen it. And to him it was almost like a large monkey-like creature. It was stood up on two legs, and it freaked him out because it had a human-like face, but ran away on all fours.
Yeah.
It seems very primitive, but it doesn't seem to have the same depth of musculature and physiology as the North American one. So it's a different creature in some ways.
Yeah, I think so too. And I've always thought that, because when you hear people describe the Almas, it's almost more like a caveman.
Yeah.
And when they're describing, and maybe I'm wrong, but when people talk about Bigfoot, they talk about it being more of hairy, very primate-like, non-human primate. But it seems like with the Almas, and you'll have to correct me on this, but it seems like with the Almas, it's very human.
Well, it can be. But I think there's a wider point, and it's one I made in my presentation, which goes to what you're saying, and it's this: we used to think, that there were, you remember when science class? I think you're roughly the same age as me.
Yeah, I think we're
a little bit younger. I think
27.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah. But you used to be science class, and there was this picture, and you're familiar with it. There's this knuckle-dragging creature, and and then it gradually progressed, and then the epitome of all things was us. We now know that there are many different types of hominim. There are many different types which coexisted with us for nearly all our existence. Not just Neanderthal, Denisovans, the deer people, Flores man. I'm not going to go on, but many different types. 20 odd human species that we know of, probably. And all I ever said or suggested was, in different isolated pockets in remote areas, could these things still exist? We don't now doubt that they did exist in coexistence with us. Could they still exist? And there's going to be regional variance. There's going to be differences, just in the same way as we're very different. And if you look at the great apes, gorillas are very different to orangs. Yeah? And I've seen both in the wild. So it's not remotely implausible. It's just unlikely, and it's about gathering evidence.
I gotcha. And is the behavior with the Olmas the same type of behavior we're seeing in the United States?
One of the things I've noticed with the creatures in that area, and also it goes as far as the Yeti in Nepal. You know, I've done expeditions to Nepal. Is that they often talk about them emitting a high-pitched whistling sound, which I find quite interesting. You know, you talked about the classic Bigfoot type encounter before, but what we're talking about there is this whistling. Yeah, this whistling. I can't even do it now. I don't make you deaf. But the classic encounter there is a farmer. He's on his high end of his pastures, yeah, grazing, and he hears this whistling, and he looks around and he sees one of these creatures, and he's struck by the fact that it's moving on two legs. It's got this sagittal crest, and it emits this whistling sound, and it freaks him out. So they have different types of behaviours. I mean, none of them have got super sophisticated. I mean, let me say this: if any of them were regularly using fire, they would act as a beacon to extinction, because hunters would see the fire,
right,
and they'd be very soon tracked down and wiped out. Bang. So I don't think they live in super sophisticated societies, nor do I think they're having magical powers to help humanity.
Yeah,
I think that they are probably more intelligent than great apes, but not as intelligent as us. Again, it's guesswork. It's guesswork. But if you're asking me to pin down where they are, I don't see any evidence of tool use more sophisticated than, say, chimpanzees.
Yeah. And even having said that, chimpanzee can be very smart.
Very, very, very smart. Very, very smart. And, you know, there's a classic thing that you can see on the internet where a chimp lights a fire and roasts some marshmallows with a twig.
No, really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know, it's like the great apes. You ever seen the great apes where they're taking apart poachers' traps?
Oh, yeah.
And they'll bring young ones to watch them do it? I mean,
absolutely.
That's intelligence.
Well, I've seen them in the wild. I've watched their behaviour. They're extremely bright. We tend to underestimate them, but we as modern humans underestimate all our cousins and even ancestors. So, for example, Neanderthals. Let's talk about that. Neanderthals were sophisticated. They had music. They had art. They mourned their dead. And we now know, I mean, this is a good example about science moving on. One of the things I mentioned was, and it goes to that film, was that in it, Professor Todd Disotell, he basically says, you know, did humans and Neanderthals have sex? Almost certainly. Men aren't not that discerning, you know. Obviously, we don't like women with hairy backs, but not all of our ancestors did. And then he says in the film, well, you know, was there progeny? Was there children as a result of these unions? And he says, almost certainly not.
Really?
Now we know, yeah.
Did he say why?
Well, he just doesn't think that it happened.
Compatible.
Yeah, they were genetically compatible. We now know that's not true. And in fact, Neanderthals are very prevalent in our genes. You know, I met up to 3 or 4%. I met somebody who had a very high level of Neanderthal DNA, because you can do all this testing these days with the genetics. Yeah. You know, and I'm sure, you know, my ex would love to have said that I had like 50% Neanderthal. You know, it's one of those things. It's prevalent. Yeah. So. That's a really good example of how science changes and reacts and adapts to circumstances depending on what we do.
And it's strange, though. You know, with Sasquatch, you'll hear reports almost like they have some sort of culture, which I guess isn't too far off. I mean, even Coco cried over her kitten being killed. You know, so there is mourning, but I think you're right. They're not at the level we are. I mean, no one's the quickest way to, like you said, light a fire. It's a great beacon to show everyone where you're at.
Yeah, just be wiped out. I mean, don't get me wrong. Species can have some sort of. It could be, you know, if they were a Neanderthal relic, they would have to have had a very big cultural recession for it to happen. I think they're more likely to be somewhere in between the great apes and us. Somewhere, on that lineage. I don't exactly know where, and it may be different in different places.
And I don't think you're too far off, because what do witnesses always say?
Yeah,
it looked like a man and an animal.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear that constantly.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I would hope a discovery is made sooner rather than later because it's just intellectually fascinating.
What's your favorite cryptid?
My favourite one is probably an orang pendek because I spent so much time looking for it, and I know I just worry about it. I mean, I'm not
it's going extinct.
Yeah, well, with Bigfoot, I don't think there's any danger of it going extinct right now. I don't feel that. With the orang pendek, there's a possibility, and I give an example which I found personally shocking. And it was one time I was going through the jungle and I was going on a Jeep. And I was just driving along on the trail. And it was great, you know, we were just chilling along on the trail. And then I came back to that same place 5 years later, and all of that area, which had been virgin rainforest, was just devastated and just palm oil, you know, just so people can have cheap peanut butter.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So and there's another thing as well. You've got a lot of, in that area, you've got a lot of human pressure. So what do I mean by that? You know, I get married. I have children. Yeah, they have three. I have three sons. Where do they get their land from? They cut down a bit more jungle. You see, there's a lot of pressure there, we can speculate about how rare Bigfoot might be in North America, but I do think that the orang pendek is very rare and very, very real, and I worry about the level of deforestation in the area. I don't want it to die out. I don't want its habitat to die out before we can find some evidence of it and maybe work harder to create a park in that area to protect it.
What as far as the orang pendek, when people come to you and say, Adam, I've seen it, what do they generally say? I realize every account's going to be a little bit different, but how do they generally describe what they've seen?
Common characteristics would be it's small, so normally no higher than about 5 feet, and it has a very large torso. Yeah, so very, very large. I mean, they often talk about it being robust. And obviously, it's in Sumatra, so it's in Indonesia, but the closest thing people who've seen pictures of, because they won't have seen one in the wild, often describe it looking almost like the same physical structure as a chimpanzee, only with a human face. And, you know, often they startle it, it's eating or foraging fruit, and it runs away. But they're struck about how physically powerful it looks. It's not really aggressive. I only ever heard of one account of possible aggression, and that was when I was with the king of a tribe there, the Sasquatch Dalam, and he said him and his son had surprised one, and it was aggressive, and it went looking for him, and they hid from it. But every other account has been farmer on the edge of the jungle. It's eating fruit, or it's broken into a barn to look for it. It likes the sugar cane, yeah. So it'll eat that, and then they've startled it, and then it's run off.
Is the behaviors the same as far as throwing rocks? And the other question I want to ask you, well, behavior first, as far as like with Sasquatch, you know, what is your typical behavior? It's going to throw stuff at you. It's going to throw crap at you. It's going to bang on trees. These are what we assume Bigfoot does, but that's one question I want to ask you. The follow-up to that is, what about vocalizations? Like, how does it vocalize?
Its vocalization is higher pitched than the typical thing that we hear in the Bigfoot, but it's a smaller creature. Yeah. It does vocalize. You know, when I've been out there, how many times have I been to? Probably 8 times I was in that jungle, and you regularly hear these high-pitched noises from it.
Like screams?
Yeah, I think it's probably fairly solitary, and I think that's one of the ways it communicates it nocturnally, to other ones. And you can hear a call from you know, if you're out in the jungle, you can hear. And I've often been out with expert trackers who are very used to the local animals in the area, and you can hear from one side. I was often at a lake going Tuja, and you'd hear from the odd vocalization from one side to the other as these things move towards one another. Yeah. So I don't think it communicates that way. I haven't heard any evidence. Again, there's no rock throwing or anything else like that.
Really?
No, not normally. I can't remember any accounts of that nature.
Do you see any similarities with this creature and the North American Sasquatch, or is it And I know I'm saying they're the same creature, but do you see similarities with them, or is it just night and day? Two separate.
Well, I think they may well be distantly related, but let me answer you this way. I mean, I wrote something for Edge Science magazine, an article entitled "New Primate Species in Sumatra," and in that I said, I speculated, well, this creature is an example of bipedal parallel evolution. So the orangutan, which is not known in that part of Sumatra, I think it probably evolved to walk bipedally. Nothing particularly stunning about that.
Yeah.
Bigfoot, I think, is probably something else completely different.
I gotcha. Yeah, it's fascinating, man, trying to keep up with you and what you're doing. You have anything else that you've been doing?
I think the main thing...
That was a lot, but I mean...
Well, I think right now at the conference, I launched my Adam Davis, DAVIS, my life story, Adam Davis Explorer, which you can find if you go into Corridor Pictures, corridor13pictures.com. You can order that, the DVD. It shows a lot of my motivations and a lot of the expeditions I've been on and why. So I think that people who'd like to follow that.
I'll have to check it out. What was the website?
It's Corridor 13 Pictures.
Okay.
If you go on there, there's some stuff with Bob Gimlin, who also appears in the DVD as a brief cameo. And I know you're very friendly with Bob, and he's a super nice guy. I really like him. And within that is my DVD.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to pick that up.
You'd like it.
I'd like to see that. Yeah, I always like the stuff. I mean, the audience knows Adam Davis. I mean, he's been on Monster Quest, and I watched the what was the one you said? The Neanderthal.
The Last Living Neanderthal.
I watched that.
Nat Geo. That was.
And there
Geo.
was one. What was it? Your guide was getting drunk or something?
Oh yeah, that was Last Living Neanderthal.
I was dying.
He'd had a few drinks.
I want to go sit and hang with that guy.
Well, that's typical Mongolia. That's what they like to do, and people can sometimes say, "Oh wow, somebody's had a drink." Well, you know what? If you're out with a load of Mongolians in the jungle, then they're going to want a drink.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That is just like totally how they roll.
When in Rome.
Yeah. They like doing that, and that's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. Well, Adam, I appreciate you coming on. I always love talking to you. I hope people go out and check out your DVD, and you're welcome back anytime, brother. It was great seeing you, man.
It's lovely seeing you.
What was your favorite part of the conference, real quick?
What I liked about the conference was that it was a rather sort of gentle and sweet tribute to Bob.
Yeah, that's very sweet.
I thought that was nicely done. It wasn't brash. It wasn't flamboyant. It was. Let me say this: when I spent some time with Bob, you know him very, very well, but I spent some time with him in January. I spent just a couple of hours in a restaurant, me and him just talking, and I didn't talk to him about the Patterson-Gimlin thing at all. I talked to him about anything else but that, so I could understand him better. And I think that people often say, well, this was these 2 minutes of his life or whatever. But there's so much more to him, and he's done some other remarkable things in his life. He's always somebody that's pushed boundaries, challenged himself, and tried to make the best he possibly could. And it's got nothing to do with the Patterson-Gimlin, and it's to do with, it's a general philosophical point about being the best person you can.
Yeah.
And I came away really liking the guy, and then we've come to this event, and there's been a number of very good speakers, but the epicenter has been about paying tribute to that guy, and I'm glad they did that. It was good, and for me, it's nothing to do with the Patterson-Gimlin. It's just about.
It's funny you say
rewarding.
That because so I'm sitting over there by Bob yesterday. And one of my listeners comes up, and I'm like, have you met Bob? I mean, he's sitting right next to me. Mm-hmm. She's like, and he was talking to someone. She's like, no, not yet. I don't really know what I'm going to say to him. And I was like, oh, come around. And she's like, no, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to. And she had been told me she rides horses. So I was like, hey, Bob, and I introduced him. Then I said, oh, she rides horses. And they must have sat there for an hour talking about horses.
Yeah, there you go.
You see Bob's eyes light up.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to, and you're right. It's more. There's way more to him than just the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy watching that. When Russell first told me, what was the name of that movie? The last one.
Yeah, I can't remember its name.
I need to ask Russ.
You have to ask Russ.
He's going to kick my butt for not knowing. But anyway, when I was watching it, and they were talking about doing this animation thing, and I was like, I don't know how this is going to go.
Yeah,
animation, it's sketchy. It was really... It
worked, didn't it?
Yeah, it was awesome,
it worked.
man.
It worked really well. I would have been like you. I would have been like, is this going to look cheesy? Like Scooby-Doo or something?
It was really cool.
It worked very well, I have to say. And I'm not saying that I'm not being paid by Russ, and neither
am I.
Or anybody else, If
I thought it was crap, I'd say.
Yeah, we just speak our minds.
Yeah.
I don't care.
No, I had it.
It was good.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun, and thanks again, brother. As
All right,
always.
my pleasure, man.
Let's go get a drink. When in Rome. And that was my interview with Adam. A lot of fun to hang out with. A lot of fun. I want to thank Adam Davis. Adam, it's always an honor to have you on. Thank you so much. I want to thank Travis Walton for coming on. Cool guy, very humble guy, very nice man. Travis had a great time interviewing you. Thank you so much. I want to thank MyBookie. Don't forget to use Chronicles to activate your offer. Let's show mybookie.ag some love. I'll throw a link in the description if you're listening to this on iTunes or your Android or your iPhone or whatever. You can click on it, go right to the link if you want. Let's show them some love. They were so cool. I mean, they were so cool to come to me and just say, hey, we like what you do. We think it's very, very cool. Until next time, everyone, remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I hope you get a chance to check out sasquatchchronicles.com, become a member, get additional shows. Yeah, that's it. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening.
Something quieter. The lights on.